Welcome, everyone. I'm excited today to talk about a topic, and we got Dan Antonelli joining us today, which I'm really excited about, from KickCharge Creative. It's all about building your franchise brand. And it's really more than that. We're going to talk about it as we go through today's webinar. It's how do you drive franchise growth? How do you drive growth of your business? The role that your brand is going to play in that. And how do you do special things? I met Dan, actually Dan and I went to high school together, and been fortunate to be in touch these past number of years, but I actually spoke to Dan again a number of years ago. I was very interested in building our brand as a law firm, and we were considering rebranding. And when I say rebranding, we really didn't have a brand. And one of our amazing clients, I was sitting with them, Ryan and Ken Parsons, the brothers that just we were sitting and we were planning out their franchise development. And I said to him, I said, guys, your logo's amazing, and it matched them. And they actually gave me Dan's book, Building a Big Small Business. And I called up Dan's branding, realized Dan and I went to high school together, and been fortunate ever since to be working with Dan on our internal branding, with many of our clients, and learning a ton along the way. So Dan's the founder of KickCharge Creative, and he's the author of Building a Big Small Business, which is a great book. And by the way, during this, if you're registered for this webinar, and if you go on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, if you tag us at #EntrepreneurSKickAss, just put an image of your logo or something about your brand, tag Entrepreneurs Kick Ass, and we'll get a package out to you. A really cool t-shirt and Dan's book, and some other stuff. So, and also mention your shirt size also. So #Entrepreneurs Kick Ass, put something about your brand. If you want Dan to give a comment about it, throw that up there, and following the webinar, I'm sure Dan's going to respond and put some comments there. So as we go into this, one of the compelling factors for me is when I see a franchise brand, a franchise company, I always evaluate what's the driving factors, sort of the intangibles for that brand. And one of them, or at least for me, is really the DNA, the strategic planning, what goes behind the brand. So when we went through the rebranding process with Dan, and even today, I could look back at that process as something more than just developing a logo, something more than just having a slogan, and really reaching to what we do as an organization, how we treat each other, how we treat our clients, and it's been one of the catalysts for our growth. And so I'm really excited to talk to Dan today about this and share some information with everyone out there. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks. It's great to be here. It's always, I'm obsessed with brands, as many people that know me are. And it's just really nice to talk to people about why it's so important and how it can really shape the future of a company. So I see so many businesses that have amazing businesses that just don't look like they have amazing businesses. So for us, when we work with companies like that, it's just always really nice to match up what they actually deliver with the perception of how their brand is communicated. So, we work with a lot of businesses, like I said, that have amazing services, but they just don't look it. So if you were to judge them on their outward appearance, which a lot of people do, they're not necessarily communicating that positive brand promise that we'll talk a little bit more about. So I've been doing this now for about 25 years or so. I started the company in 1995, and since then, we've done probably close to maybe around 1,500 or so brands. And that experience has really shown me what happens to so many businesses after they rebrand. And we have so many case studies and success stories, and it's really amazing to see what happens to these companies. And, for us as an agency, it's something that we take a tremendous amount of pride in, and we certainly know it's a huge responsibility for us, and we like to say that, we design like lives are at stake, because we've seen what happens with our brands and how they change these businesses and how these businesses grow exponentially. So it's always like this inflection point for a lot of companies when they rebrand, and then what happens after them is they grow, they hire more people, and having that being responsible for that is something that is really why the people who work here at KickCharge, that's why we do it, because we know that the work that we do is really going to change the lives of people that are affected by that, the branding work that we do. So it's great to be here and talk about that, Charles, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so Dan, one of the frustrations I have, or that I share with our clients, and some of them are, they're just starting the process of franchising their business. Some have already franchised and gained significant traction. And some are even larger systems. And one of the frustrations I have is that I see many times where, especially at the startup emerging end of the franchise world, people will they'll franchise their business, they'll spend money on their marketing teams, their sales teams, they work with other vendors, they get involved in their Google AdWords, their retargeting, their digital. And I feel like in many cases, maybe because of some bad advice or because just it seems common, they overlook the most critical element, which is, what is our brand? What does it stand for? What does our logo look like? Does it reflect our organization? And so I find a lot of times, especially franchisors that have, they started franchising 2, 3, 4 years earlier, haven't gained traction. And what I find is they started spending money on advertising and they started spending money hiring agencies, because that's sort of the easy route. It's easy for an agency to say, hey, spend money with us. The hard part of saying, okay, let's not do anything yet. Let's do a deep dive into your history, your story. Let's develop your brand. What is the core philosophy behind your company? What's your DNA? And how do we get it to reflect in that logo? And then go forward and start spending money. Because I feel like when you tell that story and do that, that builds compelling momentum for a brand. And I think 95% of them never do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the things that is always crazy for me when I think about all these other digital marketing companies and SEO companies and even web design companies, where the brand is never part of the discussion. It's hey, you want to market online? Great. Let's do that. But never examining what is actually fundamentally wrong with the branding. And so the ROI on all these other endeavors are going to be diminished. So definitely from a foundational standpoint, examining it from that perspective, it's the first thing that you should be looking at. Before you spend a dime on any marketing, that's the first thing you've got to get right. So the deeper you go down the path, the harder it is for people to want to make that change. And once you start involving the franchisors franchisees into the process, now you're talking about these companies that are already invested in this prior brand, and now you're going to tell them at that point, hey, you know what? We're changing our logo now, and now you're gonna have to get all new signage. You're gonna have to get all new uniforms for your people, and so it becomes this hurdle that once the franchise is actually going, the amount of dollars it's going to take to actually fix the branding problems keeps growing. It keeps getting larger because it's implemented further and further. Like I spoke to a national franchise about 6 months ago. They're in the lawn care sector, and they have a very tired and old logo, and their implementation of the logo, even especially on the vehicles, is poor, and they know it, and they really just said ultimately, listen, we have hundreds of franchise owners that are just so resistant to spending any money to address this. They don't want to change anything. So making sure that that's done from day one will just ultimately make it so that you never have to even think about it down the road. So yeah, it's definitely something to try to get from a foundational standpoint. So we always say it's the most important foundation to the marketing.
It is. And for the startup franchisors, I feel like they don't have a fighting chance without it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and now hitting the things that people have sent us questions, and so getting to the core from your perspective, and also from the goal of, hey, a logo and a brand's much more than a logo. It's the core of my business. For you, Dan, what is branding all about? And so when people say, I'm going to build my brand, what does that really mean?
So, branding is this term that a lot of people throw around. It sounds like it's very complex. And when I wrote the book, I tried to think about, well, how do you simplify the idea of brand? And the model that I came up with is basically thinking about a brand as you would think about a wheel. So you have logo as the hub. So that's a central part of your brand. And then everything that is around that hub, the spokes that go into the actual wheel are all the elements that integrate that brand. So you have uniforms and traditional media like print ad marketing, the website, social media, the brand voice is another component of it. So in the center of that is yes, it's the logo, because the logo is going to drive some of the aesthetics. It's going to drive almost what the voice might be. So if it's a more whimsical brand, well, then the brand voice is going to be more whimsical. But the colors are going to be identified at that point. How those colors are then implemented across the spectrum will all be part of how that drives from that. So, you think about a brand, like I said, another thing about the brand is the brand, is what people say about your company when they're talking about it to other people. So if they were at a party describing your company to their friend, how would they describe it? So that's another part of what the brand speaks to. And brand promise is another thing that we'll talk a little bit more about. But certainly logo is central. And if you don't get the logo part right, then all the other pieces fall apart. Then you can't build a wheel because you don't have the right hub on that wheel.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we were talking before, I think you said something to me, which was, because I guess we rebranded 3 or 4 years ago, and you'd mentioned that I probably then couldn't imagine the impact it would have on our business, right? And what's compelling for me is it's sort of a stepping stone. It's not only for our clients, which everything is focused on them, but it's the central point for our team. And it's to describe the transformation and the growth, and because it leads to other steps and processes, it sort of creates integrity around your whole business. And then, which leads to core values. And the process itself is very compelling.
Yeah. And if you think about, like, when we talked about rebranding your firm and what we didn't want the brand to communicate, and so we could have gone the safe route, and we could have developed a logo that looked like every other law firm logo. But yet, first of all, that wouldn't have been appropriate for you. But second of all, we made a conscious decision to develop a brand that was uniquely suited to you and your goals and the goals of the business. But if you, we probably should have had your old logo so we could have shown people where we evolved from. But the fact is that your old logo didn't capture the essence of who you guys were. And so when we address, how do we develop this brand that really speaks to what you guys are focused on, that was what we were trying to make sure that when you looked at that brand, you had a certain impression of what this law firm could do for you. And I think that, seeing how you guys have really embraced that brand and implemented, like you said, it's like an inflection point. It's the point in which you make a decision to change the direction of your company into a more positive space and make sure that everything that happens after that point is going to be that much more effective.
Yeah, and the process too is interesting, because I fought you so many times in the process.
You're a tough client. You're
Yeah,
tough.
and which is interesting because, and we'll talk about it some more, you get so close to what you perceive as your brand, and you really get stuck to it. And so we'll talk about that some more, because there's interesting stuff and there's some great examples,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, you also, we will, like you said, we'll talk more, but like you had your own specific personal bias about your own brand. And what we talked about was trying to take yourself out of the equation, because what Charles loves about a logo is maybe not necessarily exactly what the people we're trying to sell to want to see in a logo. So I have that conversation a lot, and it's like an honest conversation that I try to say, well, yes, I want you to love your logo that I designed for you, but I'm not specifically designing a logo for you. I'm designing a logo that I want your audience to connect with. And that's really I'm not designing for an audience of one, basically, is what you're trying to think about. So, I really try to take in the feedback from any client of ours who has specific likes about logos that we've done and things like that. Those are all relevant. But if I find that the target audience that they're trying to hit with their brand does not like those same things, then that's a conversation we need to have, because I don't want to design something that just appeals to you if it alienates the audience that we're trying to speak to. So.
Yeah, and it was good because you're very strong on those points, and I think we have some really cool some really cool samples to go through on your site and some good stories. But so what makes for a great logo, trade dress, vehicle wrap? Like for me, there's so many logos and brands. If I go to the International Franchise Expo and I see all these franchisors there, many times I don't understand why they're there yet, because B, their logos aren't ready, but again, they haven't figured out who they are. And so for me, when I say what makes for a great logo and trade dress, I'm really getting at what moves the needle in a big way, right? Because everyone has a logo and trade dress.
Yeah.
What are the things that intangible that moves the needle to a very compelling level?
So, I mean, like the simplest judge is to really almost think about, what does the brand say about the business to someone who knows nothing about it? Okay. So if you were to hand out a business card with your logo on it to a stranger and ask them for their impressions of what this company does or produces, most of the times the answer is going to be either neutral, meaning that I don't necessarily have a bad impression, but I don't have a good impression. I'm just not really sure of anything. Or it's actually going to be negative. It's going to be a negative impression. I'm going to look at this card and I'm going to think, I don't know if these guys are really going to be able to do a good job for me. Or I don't know if this is a nice restaurant that I want to visit. We just had a local restaurant just open up and they put an awful sign up, right? And I'm thinking to myself, man, I already think that this place sucks. I haven't been inside yet, but I'm driving by and I see this sign and I'm like, this place, like, why set the impression to be negative and then have people have to overcome that impression? I'd rather start the conversation positive. If I hand out this card for people to be like, oh my God, this guy must do amazing work, or this must be an amazing restaurant. So what that brand communicates on a subconscious level to people is what we're trying to basically address in a brand. We're trying to build a positive brand promise for someone who knows nothing about it. So if you're a service business, listen, most service businesses, people already think they're going to get screwed by the service business. They don't have a positive impression of most contractors. They're worried about the guy who's going to be coming to their home and making sure that he does the right thing. So I want to try to make it so before they ring the doorbell, they already think that this guy and this company is honest, ethical. They're going to do the right thing. So helping to make sure of that is really what the brand is supposed to do. So the beauty of this is, listen, if let's just say 80% of every small business has either a neutral or negative brand, well, what happens to the other 20% that has a positive brand? They're already now above those other companies. So when we do competitive analysis and we're researching what brand strategy to deploy for a client, and I look at their top 5 competitors, it's 95% of the times they're awful. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, wow, this is great news for you, because these guys all already look like they're horrible. I don't care if they're the biggest, but they don't look like they're doing anything great. So I look at that as an opportunity. So that's why I always say that, branding is such a great opportunity for small businesses because none of their competition really has any idea of what they're doing with it. So you come in there with this brand that just blows these people out of the water. Now all your marketing works harder, your dollars go further, your ROI increases. So, certainly thinking about it from that perspective, but brand promise is really all about what we're trying to do is make sure that that logo communicates a positive brand promise.
Yeah, it's interesting too. And I find it compelling, and I take pause too sometimes if you ask a business owner, what's the most compelling aspect of your business, what differentiates you, and a lot of times people have trouble with that. And I see a ton of neutral brands in the franchise world, and I know when they reflect later on about how their growth was slower, or they're not gaining traction, it's all related. And again, it's the philosophy and the thought process, I believe, that comes with the rebranding and the development. So it never stops surprising me how powerful it is. And what I also find interesting, Dan, too, is when you deal with a lot of service-based businesses, and when you deal with them, and certainly we have a number of clients, mutual clients, it's always interesting how their brand's amazing, but the follow through from the customer service, the organization, the brand promise that you're talking about becomes so core to them. And I don't think it's a coincidence that these things go together, right?
No, not at all.
It's such a big intangible. So, and again, we're going to have these great examples, I think, but what are the mistakes you see? Like something right now, if I'm a franchisor, I'm a business owner, what are some of the mistakes right now that, hey, if I'm doing this, it's a big problem?
Well, I think you see a lot of companies, like we talked about, they don't invest in it early on. So it becomes this stumbling block later on because they worry so much about, well, now if I change this, all these things are going to have to change too. So they just keep pushing that decision down the road. And then they get to a certain point where it has to be addressed. So that's why it's always best, if you're a startup or you're a new business, to really invest in branding from day one, because then you'll have the right foundation. But, you also see a lot of businesses where they've had this logo for so long. So that becomes the justification for not changing. So like, well, oh my God, change my logo. Like, why would I ever want to change my logo? Because I've been so successful with this logo, and now you're telling me that I need to change it. And I always try to flip that question, and I say, well, you know what? Imagine how much more successful you would have been if you actually had a better brand. So thinking about it from that perspective and saying, well, I sort of use the analogy that brands are like warm blankets to their owners, because they kind of get all warm and fuzzy, and they've been using it for so long, and they don't want to make that change. But the reality is it really doing all those things we talk about? Is it communicating a positive brand promise? Is it going to work in all the mediums that it needs to be deployed? Like, especially if you have vehicles or signage requirements. Is it something that can, even from the most simplistic thing, like be embroidered? Like, you see some logos and they can't even be like embroidered on guys' uniforms because it's like a photograph or things like that. So there's some nuts and bolts stuff that make some of these logos just not work at all. But a lot of times you really, again, goes back to brand promise. Like, what does it say about your business? Is this the brand that represented you from day one? And now does it represent you from where you want to go in the future? And is it appealing for people that are trying to sell franchises? You got to make sure that brand looks like something that a potential investor is going to want to buy into, and make sure that it speaks to them in a way that doesn't look amateurish, doesn't look homegrown. Like, it's all cool that maybe you did it or your friend did it. And I understand that. And I understand the passion you may have that you created it yourself. That's fine, but don't let it hamstring where you need to go by holding on to something that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, we encounter that a lot. And so frequently, when you're working on a brand, you'll contact us about potential trademark conflicts. I'd say about 20% of our startup franchisors come to us with a brand or a trade name that they can't obtain the registration for, or can't be protected. Usually it's descriptive. And again, I have empathy because I understand. I've been through the process. I know you have too with your own brand.
Yep.
And I try to communicate that let's look at this as an opportunity because your brand isn't as good as you think it is right now. And you really need to get to the next level. We can't be ordinary. But I empathize with them. We do reach a result. We do get to the rebranding, but it's 5 or 6 of those conversations. And I understand as a founder and as an owner, it's difficult. And then there's some brands getting to the mistakes, which is they understand all that, but they stick with the old brand. And then that's where I think, as you mentioned, that's where I think the damage gets compounded. We start placing paid advertising, portal leads, and everything's disjointed, and they just don't get that sales traction. So it's a tough situation. So like right now, we talked about mistakes, but what would be a checklist right now? So for example, one of the best things we ever did, I mentioned to you, Dan, during the call, we just moved to our new offices. Right now, I'm actually on a folding table. We didn't order we actually ordered new furniture, but it's not here yet. But one of the first things we did was put our video screens throughout the office, right? And it was not so much about us, but it was, it got to the brand promise. So we reached a point where we decided, hey, in the major parts of our office, we need live, streaming of different aspects about our clients, their brands, their logos, their social media feeds, remind us why we're here, right? And to us, that became part of our brand promise. That became part of our DNA. But so that was like a checklist item. I actually read it in an article. I think it was in Donald Miller's Story Brand. One of his checklists was, hey, does your office have media that describes what you do and your purpose? So right now, if I'm a business owner, franchisor, what would be like 4 checklist items that I would say, whether I could check or put an X in it, are we doing this? Are we being consistent with our brand? Things we should be aware of that would, if I can't say yes or no, it could be a problem.
I mean, consistency is one part that, you kind of talk about as well. So making sure that, is it able to be reproduced on every single medium? So everything from, embroidery to the sign on the building to the signage on the vehicles, can it be reproduced in a manner that keeps it intact no matter what the application? So that's one thing, certainly. Clip art is another thing that is problematic. So if your logo deploys clip art, then you can't trademark it. It's really as simple as that. So you have guys that want to develop a national brand and they're using, generic clip art that they can't own. So if you can't own the artwork for your own brand and trademark that, then there's nothing to stop anyone else from using the same exact artwork. So clip art is really a big issue. And it's a big problem because people don't realize the limitations of it. They think, well, I changed it a little bit, maybe as their kind of excuse to why that maybe that's still okay, but it's still a derivative. Or if it's just straight out clip art, then you can't even use it technically as a logo to begin with. So you'll never get it trademarked. You also have to think about naming issues, like you mentioned. So you have a company that maybe wants to franchise their brand, and then they come to find out that they can't even own their brand name. Whether, like you said, it's too descriptive. Maybe there's someone else out in another state that has the same name that already filed for the trademark. So making sure that the name that you even choose can be franchised is another part of making sure that you have that. Again, like we said, handing out your card to someone who knew nothing about it. What do they say about your company is another way to evaluate it. The obvious thing, like, is it legible? Like I know you had sent me a couple of people you were working with, and when I looked at their brands, I was like, oh my god, like you can't even read the lettering here. Like, how is this going to translate onto signage? How is this going to work on the top of a website, things like that. So making sure that it's legible. I mean, it sounds like really strange to have to say that, should your logo be legible? But yeah, you see a lot of people that have all these crazy things happening in them and then you can't even read it. So that's another thing. And like a big rookie mistake is having Inc. or LLC in your logo. It's not something that is required. I don't know if it's a lot of lawyers telling their clients that you have to have Inc. and LLC in their logos, but it's not accurate. You don't need to have that in your logo. So if you have that in your logo right off the bat, like that's to me a pure sign of an amateur right there. So definitely don't put Inc. and LLC in your logo. It's the same reasons why Burger King and McDonald's don't have Inc. and LLC in their logos. It's not a legal representation of your company.
So Dan, what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump on some of these slides. I'm going to jump ahead because I want to get to the fun part.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I want to go to, you have a great section on your site, before and after shots of some logos, and we have some more. But if you don't mind, you could just, I'd like to go to your site, and if you could just share with us, you just tell me which, let me just get this set up for the screen, and we'll go over some before and after. And I'd be really, I think it'd be really helpful to get your thought process on what you're seeing, and if you could share with us any experiences or the results.
So like, I mean, even just looking at the first one for Bueller. So,
okay. And for everyone there, this is the before. I guess it was Air Source America, and this was the after.
So, I mean, the story with this brand is the company was called Air Source America, and the client felt like no one could remember that name, and no one knew what that name meant. They were like, well, do you supply oxygen maybe? Do you, like, what do you do? So he was 10 or 12 years into that name. And he came to us and he said, his last name is Bueller. His name is Jason Bueller. And he said, everyone just remembers me by my last name, but they can't remember the name of my actual company. So I said, well, why are we running away from it then? Why don't we embrace it? Everyone knows the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Why don't we embrace it and develop something that's really, really about your last name and develop this cool new look? And so we rolled out his brand about 5 weeks ago, I think. We did his everything from his website, his brochures. We did all the vehicles for him. And funny story, he told me the other day he was in a hardware store and he had his embroidered shirt on, and the guy behind the counter said, "Oh, you're from Bueller, right?" And he said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Wow, that's such a cool company, man. I see your trucks all the time." And Jason said, "Yeah, we've been in business for 10 years, but we used to be called Air Source America." And the guy said, "Who? I never heard of that company." And so here's a guy that's been in the community for literally, 12 years, has every single van labeled with his company name. And this, I mean, this guy had no idea that they were in the same community. And literally he's in the community now for 4 weeks and is already being noticed by people that had just totally not even seen him before. So, I mean, he's talking about the response just being completely surpassing what he thought was going to happen with it. But it's been such a huge success. I mean, listen, the vans are hard to miss, and that goes along with the theory that we talk about in terms of being disruptive, right? So why design a brand that looks like every other brand? His previous truck was white and basically blended into everything else, so you could see the, huge difference in how that brand lives now in that environment, and it's so much more disruptive. So that, that's definitely one example of one. I think Seatown is another one right next to it. I mean, you could scroll over it real fast and see the before and after. The before brand, it wasn't like it was awful, but it was somewhat forgettable. And certainly the new one certainly has a new vibrance. It has colors that are unique. So we were always looking at that too, is trying to think about, well, what colors are unique in your particular space. So when we research the competitive landscape, we're looking at what every other competitor is doing and what colors they're claiming. And now we want to come up with a brand scheme that's unique that they can claim ownership to. So, these vans, he just rolled out, I think, a dozen of these vans. And again, he said the response has just been insane. Just people like, "Oh my God, it's so cool. I see it all the time." Whereas before they were like, the vans were all white. They didn't really stand out like they do today, for sure.
Yeah, and for me, I just imagining what the proposal looks like after the rebranding compared to before, and how even as a consumer, sort of price becomes less relevant. It's going to be absolutely relevant, but it's less relevant than with the white and green. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Which company looks like a company you want to have ringing your doorbell? The other company didn't look not professional. It just didn't look as inviting. It wasn't as fun for sure. Barker's another one, like Barker, right there. So there's the
Yeah.
before, and way too many things happening on the truck to begin with, but it was so cold, right? There's nothing warm and inviting about where the previous brand was. But now you've got this nice image. It's a very soothing color scheme. We played off the idea that their last name was Barker, so why not embrace the idea and implement something with a dog and a instead of a bone, he's holding a wrench. It just feels like a company that's going to do a better job for me, and be more. I'm more comfortable calling them to come to my home than the other company. The other company feels like every other company. So how do you be disruptive? How do you stand out? And that was how we did it for Barker.
Dan, I'm curious, when you're like with these examples and you see a dramatic result, um, on the before end, when these business owners come to you and they're discussing, hey, maybe I want to have a new logo, or what's their mindset, or like, what's their concerns, or what's bothering them, or what was the pain point that pushed them to reach out to you?
Well, a lot of times they're recognizing the fact that their own brand doesn't do some of the things that we talk about that it should be doing. So they're like, it doesn't represent us as well anymore. It doesn't feel like who we are, or it's not going to help me get to the next level. That's something we hear all the time, where guys are like, listen, we really want to take this business to the next level, and we know that this brand is really holding us back. So looking at it from that perspective is certainly another thing that they identify in their mind as needing to change. I'm trying to think of what else. Like Four Seasons is another one. Like
Yeah, that's interesting.
it's okay, but like again, the use of photography is something you don't want to have living on a stands out more than the other. He's got a fleet of these things now rolling down the road, and as soon as people see these unique colors living together, they know that that's a Four Seasons band. So that was really a fun brand to work on, and like I said too, you see here that this becomes the inflection point. Like all these guys are growing substantially, like after they go through this process. Like we haven't had anyone come back and say, oh my God, like we should have never invested in this. Listen, you're going to have some pain as you implement, because it's costly, right? You got to do things over. Like we get that, but this is a huge investment in infrastructure. And then once it's done, then you've got the right tools. Now you're ready for battle. You're ready to like kill it for the next level because you've got all the right foundational elements done.
Well, one of the things we were talking about too is, again, not a coincidence, but a lot of these brands have amazing reviews.
Yeah.
And they go on build, their customer service levels go up. They focus on their reviews. I know a lot of the clients we work with, their teams are, well, just as one example, the brothers that just do gutters, Ryan and Ken Parsons, are so detail oriented. They care about their customers so much. Their culture is absolutely off the charts, both in terms of how they treat their employees and the brand promise to their customers. And again, these things just keep matching up whenever I see that dynamic logo, and again, because there's just something so much more behind it.
And that's important for us too, because honestly, like we actually researched the company that's looking to hire us to make sure that they're going to live up to the promise that we built for them. Because the last thing I want to do, I don't want to be responsible for developing this brand that speaks to this amazing service that you might get, and then they ring the doorbell and they can't live up to it. So we have 95% of the time, it's not that case. It's they have an amazing service or an amazing business or an amazing product. They just don't look like they do. So I look at that, I'm like, oh my God, like now my job is easy, because all I have to do is match up what these guys deliver, and then it's a home run. You know, now everything is in sync. From the moment they ring the doorbell, the moment the customer walks in that store, it looks like as good as the brand projects it to be.
Yeah, well, and getting to the passion, there's an example that I love, my good friend Carlos at Empanada Guy. I'm going to try to play the video Carlos posted the other day, but here's the before and after, right? And
Yeah.
Carlos, you guys developed their new logo, but I'm going to let me see if I could play Carlos's video. And Carlos is a really dynamic guy, but let me see if I could play this here. Hopefully it won't come out choppy, but this is Carlos actually unveiling and announcing his new logo.
Been trying to build for so many years. And what I'm going to show you is something that has to do with rebranding. We're franchising. That being said, we're going to be all over the country. So by doing that, this has to happen. We need to identify what we do and to touch our culture. Certain things have to change. I think I'm going to catch you by surprise. You're going to laugh, but you're going to connect. Changing sometimes can be very difficult and it can be hard, stressful, but change is good. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to bring you over here. I'm going to show you. The brand is about a character to represent the product. The empanada has never been represented by a human, by a Latino, Hispano, sea lo que sea. It's never been branded properly. Empanadas hasn't been very big in America. It is in a lot of Latin countries, of course, and throughout the world, but in America, not really. So this is my way of telling America, boy, I'm here. Okay, check this out. This is over 10 years of evolution. Long time waiting for this, man. Long time.
So, I mean, no one can announce a brand better than Carlos.
This is the best.
Yeah, and what's great about that for me is everything he's saying is 100% genuine. That is Carlos. That is Empanada Guy. And you know, I have to say, I mean, I think you killed it with the rebrand for Carlos and their team. And how did you go about, you know, I mean, it's just great to see that end result. No, Dan?
Yeah. And, you know, and he, you know, the previous brand exhibited some of the problems that we talked about. You know, there's legibility issues. Like you could look on the screen now and you can see that Empanada Guy on the before is really difficult to read. You know, it's photography based, so they could never get this embroidered. We also approached it with the idea of trying to figure out, well, how would this work from a package design standpoint? You know, how can we deploy elements of this brand on packaging and things like that? So, you know, the idea of developing him into a mascot, listen, Carlos is so much a part of what makes that brand unique. So we're not going to run away from that. We wanted to embrace it, but we wanted to develop it in a way that, you know, looks more like you would expect a larger franchise to deploy. Like you wouldn't see a bigger company using photography and things like that, certainly in a brand. So, you know, it just really worked out perfect. And Carlos, what was cool too, is like Carlos has kind of trademark things. You know, he always wears the red beanie on there. So like our handkerchief. So, you know, having that deployed on there and then displaying the actual product in the mascot, I think, you know, really worked out well. So, you know, it's just really cool to see you know, to see him. You know, he was so much fun to work with too. He was really a lot of fun, and he was scared too. You know, like, you know, he had lived with the other one for so long, but he knew he needed to change. And when we first presented it to him, it took, you know, it wasn't like, oh my God, that's it. You know, they really liked it at first, but they needed to sit on it for like a week or so and really kind of let it sink in. And we made a couple of tweaks to the actual way the empanada was rendered, but outside of that, we really didn't change much. You know, we pushed back a little bit at one point because they had wanted to see some other typography or some other type. And it was really important for me that we stayed with type that could remain legible at smaller distances and at larger distances as well. So, you know, we got to a point where I think we got everything that we needed to get encapsulated in that logo, and it really hits on all the things that we want to see happen in a brand. So I was really happy with the end result, and I just, it's going to be really cool to see where he is in a few years, because I think he's got all the right tools in place now. He's got you helping him with all this stuff. He's got the right branding, and he's got a great product too. The stuff is amazing. So
yes, I love how he mentioned that it was 10 years in the making, that brand.
Yeah.
I just think it's tremendous.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite, and a great guy too, and this is not a franchise, at least not right now, or not yet, I should say, but
right.
Carpet Chemist was really interesting for me. Because to me, it's a very compelling brand that you guys built, and I believe you did it from the ground up, name and all, and everything else.
Yeah. We worked with him on the naming, and then the idea was what he would do down the road would be to develop into a franchise. So we tackled the branding with that in mind. I mean, franchise branding in itself has certain characteristics about how brands are built, which typically work better in a franchise environment. They can also work for a regular, standalone business as well. But he always gets asked, oh, where's your other locations? Like, how many franchises do you have? Or how do I become a franchise? So it's really ironic because he's not a franchise yet. I know he's in the process and he's working towards that, but he's already had multiple people call him up saying, I want to get a Carpet Chemist franchise. Like, how do I do that? So it's really interesting to have people automatically assume that he's a franchise just based on the visuals. And that gives him a leg up, I think, against people who don't invest or haven't invested in their brand the way that he has. I mean, the van that we did for him is just ridiculous. Like, it just totally stands out. He gets so much work from just driving that van around. And it certainly does look like a larger entity. And people like, in that particular sector, you have, Stanley Steamers and some of the other more national franchise brands. And people do place more trust in franchise brands. So he's competing with franchise brands, even though he's not a franchise, but he gives off the impression that he is, and he's doing really well. And, it was really a lot of fun, but I can't wait for him to take it to the next level and start getting other guys. But he's got a lot of people already just, how do I get involved? They're excited about being a Carpet Chemist brand when he hasn't even taken a step to become a franchise yet, So like, that's pretty neat. Like, think about the power of a brand that people want to actually invest in a franchise that doesn't even exist yet, so.
No, and I love how proud he is of Brandon, of his company, and it's great. I'm gonna two more quick. I know this is the fun part for me. Naturally, Brothers Gutters. I think you killed it there. With and really was the reason I called you. I was like, wow, this is a great logo, and they've gone on to build an amazing. I mean, to just call them a franchisor does disservice to them. What an amazing organization they're building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dan, I'll jump to my favorite, which was EcoMates, which was, a company that we had acquired at a point in time. We acquired and I think you did a great job. And in fact, I gave pushback on your redesign on this logo, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's just words. I mean, I think it's the most amazing logo now, but it's interesting. I did have to sit on it a couple of days compared to.
Yeah. And, and listen, the original brand, it's not like it was like awful. It just didn't capture the same type of feeling, and that's what we're really trying to think about. And I think the original brand was also based on clipart, if I'm not mistaken. So
the original one was, yeah. And that wasn't me. We acquired it that way, but yes.
Yeah.
I had in the slides, how does it influence culture? I think we talked about it, but again, it's an intangible. I'm just trying to reach, whether it's the founders at Carpet Chemist, how excited they are about their company that's growing. You have some really large organizations in the service industry I think, what would be one of your biggest service-based industry clients? How many vans would they have now?
Like 100. Yeah. So one of the probably the largest success story that we have in the service industry is a company called Gettle Heating and Air Conditioning out of Phoenix and Vegas. And we rebranded them when they were 8 million in revenue, and that was 4 years ago. And they're at 70 million right now. So, I mean, it's just mind blowing, honestly, and certainly a big inflection point for them. Clearly, I'm not going to say that we're 100% responsible for that growth, but I will take a bit of credit for developing a brand that has really connected and has been the foundation of their entire advertising campaign. You know, their billboards, their radio spots are all connected to the brand that we developed for them. And so when I said earlier on about thinking about design and the responsibility that we have as an agency, you know, yeah, lives are at stake. Like, think about how many jobs have been created taking a company from 7 million to, you know, almost $80 million in revenue. How many new jobs have been created because of that? So, you know, it's very gratifying for us to know that, you know, we were a big part of that success and that we really helped get them to the next level. You know, we still work with them on a lot of things. We're actually redeveloping their website right now. So it's just really, you know, that's definitely one. But, you know, you have guys that are just completely brand new startups that we brand, and that responsibility is no different. You know, it's almost sometimes more responsible because, listen, the guy's laying it out all on the line. You know, he quit his job and he decides he's going to start up a business, and he's laying it all on you to make sure that you give him the right foundation. So, you know, that's a huge responsibility for us. But, you know, we had a company that we just named called Plums Up, started from scratch, and he went from 0 to, you know, already hired his third employee within 6 months of starting. And, you know, a lot of stuff is happening because people see his logo and they see the van that we did for them. They think the name is so cool. So, you know, we've really laid out a perfect foundation for him to be successful. So, you know, so it doesn't have to be dollars in terms of success for us, but just knowing that we're giving them the right tools to get them to where they want to go is really why I think the team here is so passionate about working with small businesses. You know, a lot of my employees have come from agencies where they worked for big corporations and they just couldn't get the same satisfaction out of the work that they were producing. You know, it was cool to design a campaign for a national company, but, you know, when you're dealing one-on-one with an owner and his family and his employees and developing something that's going to affect them, you know, there's a lot, there's almost more at stake, I think, sometimes when you're working with that. So, you know, that's really what I enjoy most about working with them.
Yeah. And we're going to, if anyone has questions and you want to chat them in or put them in, absolutely just, you know, put some, you know, we'll go over as many questions as we can. And again, if you'd like, just, on social media, Instagram, Facebook, tag us at hashtag EntrepreneurSKickAss. Put your logo in. If you have a question there too, I'm sure Dan will respond afterwards, and we'll also send you a copy of Dan's book and some of our gear, our Entrepreneurs Kick Ass. And then one question I had for Dan, and it gave me a really quick answer, was what do you do after you develop a new logo and slogan and your vehicle wrap? And naturally, along that process, you probably should be filing a trademark registration. But Dan had a really cool answer, which was go to his website. If you go to KickCharge.com and click on tools, tips and tools, and
it's under tips and tools, and then it's next steps.
Okay, so, and what are they going to find there, Dan? What type of information?
Yeah, scroll back up, click on that, and then go right to next steps.
Okay. Okay.
So on here is basically what we call the KickCharge rebrand roadmap. So this is literally like every single thing that needs to happen after you develop a new brand. And it talks about how you implement it across the different channels. So there's a lot that goes into it. So you got to be cognizant of all the things that will have to happen on a rebrand. and how it gets executed. So we've kind of listed out all the different things that will happen once you go through that process. Because we had some people like, well, we just did the logo. Now what do we do? So like, well, let's walk you through all the stuff that you need to do so that you have a better understanding of how everything is going to be implemented. So like when we did the rebranding for Jason at Bueller, we did obviously the uniforms and the stationery and all his marketing brochures, and we did his website. But then we also communicated that change to all his existing customers. So we developed a letter that spoke to the reasons why he rebranded. So we like to use that even as an example to sort of, first of all, you touch base with the existing customers, you let them know why there was a change and how this is a positive, and you're almost thanking them for allowing your company to grow to a point in which you want it to be even more successful. So all those little things go into it, because last thing you want to do is have brand confusion once you rebrand. Like, oh well, what happened to the other company? So you've got to really try to hit that messaging dead on as soon as you go live with the new brand. Obviously your social channels, you would be talking about it there, but you still have to remember the traditional things, like a direct mail to all your existing customers and making sure that they know what changes they may be seeing in the coming months, whether it's seeing new vans or the sign on the store maybe changing, things like that.
I think that's helpful. Actually, I'm a little jealous because I now want to build out a roadmap on what's next after our client's franchisor as their
yeah.
So we are going to be doing that. I think, and again, it's at kickcharge.com, and we do have some questions, and hopefully.
Yeah, I can see the first one from Dawn, I think.
Yeah, Dawn. Actually, I really like Dawn's question there. Which, by the way, I can't see it. I have it on my phone, but yeah, I mean, if you want to just.
So yeah, Dawn's question was, what are your thoughts on the growing impact of digital search for brands with names spelled correctly versus spelled in a clever way for their logo? And as related to a follow-up question, what are your thoughts on a business name that gives the brand ability to register their trademark, as it has to be unique but not overly generic in descriptive terms? Better to be Dawn's Design Service or Dawn Designed It, totally made up. Yeah. So it's really funny that you have that question, because we rebranded about, I think it's almost 2 years now that we rebranded and renamed the agency. So we used to be called Graphic Designs, and it was Graphic D-Signs. And that was our original name. And we actually have a trademark on our original name, which I always thought was interesting that we were able to actually get that trademark, because it could also be interpreted as being a descriptive phrase. But we did get a trademark for it. So, I'm conflicted on one hand because, I was Graphic Designs for 20 years, and, people couldn't spell it. They couldn't pronounce it. They didn't know if it was, design. Like it was just very awkward. I'm actually working with another client right now who's trying to name her house cleaning business, and she had a similar type of name like you're suggesting, Dawn. And I'm conflicted about it because on one hand, I get the idea of being unique, but then I think about all the applications that you referenced. Like, first of all, people are going to Google it, and then they're not going to know how to spell it correctly, or they're going to spell it wrong. So I know it's really hard to come up with names that are trademarkable and that are unique and aren't descriptive. It's really a very tough thing. Like, I was so glad when we were able to come up with KickCharge, because we were able to get the federal trademark, we were able to get the .com. Like, we had a lot of stuff going for us when we got that. So, I think that, it's hard, like, you have to really do a lot of research and see if you can come up with a name that you can really own without being cute, if it's possible. And sometimes that's just really, really challenging. But like, Dawn's Design Service probably, I don't know that would pass federal. Dawn Designed It probably would pass federal, the way you have it spelled there. But, you have a lifetime ahead of you of then telling people how to spell your domain name and your email address. And so I tend to not want to try to be, have something like that if I can avoid it. Like when we looked at a lot of other names, we were renaming KickCharge, there were some that were, I thought, really clever, but they didn't spell the way that they sounded, and I was afraid of having that. So it's just nice to be able to say, hey, you want to send me an email, it's dan@kickcharge.com, and it's not very complex to really have people figure that out. So
Dan, I think it's interesting that you mentioned, you were able to get the domain name and then registration. Those are important things. I was going to Don's question too. I think SEO has evolved in such a way where you're not name dependent. So like Barker's, I think it is for plumbing, or Barker was one of your brands, Dan. So I think SEO has advanced to a point where you could get beyond that. And if your website is, so to me, at least from a legal protection standpoint, a franchise sales standpoint, I think being unique and disruptive, or, different from the typical descriptive names, not only gives you legal protection, but it's also going to create a compelling brand. I also think on the SEO end, I don't think it should matter anymore.
I think it for us, when we were graphic designs, like if you think about, like if someone told you, hey, you got to call graphic designs to get a logo, and that's all you knew, and then you go online, you type in graphic designs logo and you spell it with DES, we may or we may not show up. Like, I think it has gotten better than it used to be for sure, but it's really hard to own the term graphic design or graphic designs on Google unless you have the dash in there. Like, we would own it if you put the dash in there, but if you didn't put the dash in there, then we weren't being found as much. So, to me, you got to be careful about that. And maybe it was more unique for us because our name was also a description, which is one of the reasons why we changed it. And, going back to the point of, well, when is it time to rebrand? For us, I knew we should have rebranded probably 5 years before we even did it. So it took me a while to come around to accepting the fact that we had to change. But oh my God, like once I decided to change, like I couldn't wait for us to be KickCharge. Like I was wearing KickCharge apparel and hats 6 months before we were KickCharge. I was so excited because I'm like, oh my God, it's finally a name that I'm like proud to say. And so going through the process myself, like I never underestimate from a business owner how difficult it is to change. Again, having gone through it myself, I probably have a deeper appreciation now than I had before experiencing it myself. But it's been the best thing ever for us. Like I'm so glad we did it. Like it was, definitely a great story, a great decision for us, I should say. So, anyways, Michael Popora wrote, as an employee of a large organization, I have no authority or input on our branding. What are one or two things I can do to differentiate myself or my message on social media to distinguish from the pack? So, Michael, I think that the biggest thing, like if you're in charge of promoting social media and you're being hamstrung by the existing brand and how that brand gets rolled out into your social media messages, maybe that's something that you could bring up as far as, how that's kind of holding you back, how like there isn't anything unique about your brand voice that you can capture in your social media postings, and see if there's a way that message can reach the people that in your organizations that have the power to maybe to talk about branding, and even use examples of other companies in your space that really are getting it from a brand perspective. Like you look at their social platform and you see the way that they're posting and the way that their brand voice is being communicated, and you say, that's kind of the way we should be doing it, but I can't because our brand is generic, or our brand just doesn't have its own voice. So maybe some other examples of people within your space you can leverage and try to see if there's something that you guys can use to help have them understand why it's so important for you and how that would help you do your job better.
That's great. And Mike's a great, he's an amazing insurance professional. I personally think he should maybe brand himself and work with someone like you and create his own mini brand for his, as he works with different segments of the insurance industry. That's great stuff. Yeah. And what I'd like to do, Dan, I appreciate again, if you'd like Dan to give a comment about your brand, take a look at it. you know, hit us on social media, tag at Entrepreneurs Kick Ass. Put your brand up there. You know, I'm sure Dan will respond. We'll also get you Dan's book and some other stuff. And of course, check out KickCharge Creative. And Dan, I've been looking forward to this. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Yeah, this was fun, and you know, I could talk about this all day long, I guess.
Me too. So, and everyone that's on the call, really appreciate it. Anything any of us could do, just let us know. We're glad to reach out. Dan, thank you so much.
All right, thanks, guys. Take care.